The thing that I learned from my very first school is we should have people be honest and put their name and attach their email address to their feedback. Because if there is something that is working or not working for them, being able to follow up with them and say like, hey, I noticed in your feedback that you said that this worked or this isn't going well for you.
Welcome to Principal Office Hours, where we swear there's no detention slip waiting for you. Just real talk from real principals who've survived everything from budget apocalypses. In today's episode, we're going to go deep in one of the dark arts of being a leader and an administrator and a principal. How do you give and receive feedback in a way that is clear, consistent, and caring, and also helps to, number one, get the message across, and number two, actually help to improve the situation and the relationship? There's a lot to unpack in today's episode. Today's guest describes education as being in her family business. She has taught and been in administration from TK through 8 for coming to 13 years now, and she actually plays the role of a principal today, but she prefers the title Lead Facilitator. It's a great pleasure to have with us in our studios today Charlotte Pickett. She is the Lead Facilitator at Nea Community Learning Center. This was a role that she rejoined in 2022 after previously working there earlier in her career. Welcome to the show, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit more about Nea and what it's like today, the community that you serve.
Yeah. So Nea is currently a TK through 8 charter school. We are located in Alameda, California, which is a small little island, which used to be Coast Guard and Navy, and we're right near Oakland. We were formerly K through 12 when we were founded 15 years ago. And so as we've been transitioning into a new identity, that which looks like our TK through 8. And we have actually a final class of 12th graders this year that are graduating, and some of them have been here since kindergarten. And so we're excited for the new transition. And as they exit, we will be fully transitioned into our new identity as a TK8. We are all on one campus. We are fully project-based learning. So it really contextualizing learning, getting kids to understand the why and the how of what they are learning, rather than what many of us experience education, which is adults in the front of the classroom who told us you have to learn this, or just trust me, it's going to be important because I said so, et cetera, et cetera. And we want our kids to ask questions. We want them to inquire about the world and not to take things at face value, and want to deepen their understanding of themselves and people around them. And as we move forward and we're thinking through what it means to have our TK through 8 identity, is finding ways to bring leadership into our 7th and 8th graders and to have them really embrace what it means to be the older ones on campus. We're incredibly diverse. I mean, we have race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, language. We have everything in a classroom. And I think it supports our learners to understand folks that are different than them and have discourse across difference, rather than waiting to maybe the experience when you got to college or you studied abroad and now you're experiencing new cultures and new folks. It's actually them learning with folks that are different and getting to learn about those cultures while they're learning all of their academic pieces as well.
I'm glad you mentioned the diversity piece, because your own experiences are pretty diverse as well, because you spent some time. Right now, you're in a relatively cozy community in the school.
Mm-hmm.
But just to give the listeners a sense of scale, like how many students do you currently have in campus?
We have about 475 learners across TK through 12th grade.
Yeah, so you got about 500 learners.
Mm-hmm.
And you spent some time also in San Francisco Unified as an AP. Like the scale difference is just so huge. What are some of the learning points that you've had, like working at both ends of the scale spectrum for schools?
Yeah, of course. So I was at a comprehensive middle school, which is 6th through 8th grade, 750 kids. And then for 2 years, and then transitioned to a different middle school. It's like actually was also a pre-K through 8 program. There just happened to be 2 separate campuses. So there was an elementary campus and a middle school campus. And there are about 200 or so middle schoolers on that campus. And so I think, it is very different. I think being in a larger district, there's a lot of folks, there's a lot of stakeholders. You have people within your own community, your own teachers, your staff, your families, your kids. And then you also have kind of the other administration side, you have your kind of superintendents, directors, assistant superintendents, and all the folks at the central office. Whereas being here, it's very much a small community. Our executive director, which is basically our superintendent, our chief operating officer, all those folks are right here on campus, and our special ed director is right on campus here. So that kind of intimacy allows for very wonderful and like robust collaboration, because if I have a question like a specific child and maybe their accommodations or what their goals look like, I have folks that I can really talk to immediately. I can actually just walk to her office and ask her a question versus maybe having to wait a little bit longer to get that information.
That's perfect. And many of us are going to be listening to this just as the school year is about to begin. And one of the things that we talked about before was this framework that you have for the beginning of your school year. It's a 3C framework. It's very neat and very good, which I like. But at the same time, we're going to spend some time today unpacking that and getting deep into the details of it. Talk to us about this framework. What are these 3Cs?
Yeah, of course. So our 3Cs that we carry are care, clarity, and consistency. So everything that we do embodies those, I guess, values, those pieces. I feel very fortunate to have worked with really amazing administrators in San Francisco Unified and even here at Nea. And a lot of this came from those folks. So I don't, of course, want to take credit for things that are mine. I think we are really fortunate to work in community with other administrators that help us to grow and become better. So even in one of my schools in San Francisco, we had 3 values or 3 pieces that we carried through those school years. And I found those to be incredibly helpful in centering the way that we move as a community, the way that our staff understands how we need to show up for kids and what is important. So everything comes back for us at Nea to care, clarity, and consistency.
And one of the toughest things about having a solid framework for leadership and your values, it's so easy for these to just become like words on a wall, right? Or a poster on the wall. How do you live this out, like on a day-to-day basis? How is it baked into your routines? You mentioned about it impacting the way that staff show up for students, but also I'm imagining also for family. What are the ways that these infuse themselves into daily operations for you guys?
Yeah. So I think if I first start with care, so the idea of listening to folks, hearing what is coming up for them, like understanding and valuing folks' experiences, whether it be staff, families, kids, giving consistent feedback, being honest. Just I think that honesty is incredibly important to bringing people together and being open-minded. So, how are we bringing people in? That sense of like reflection, how am I situating myself within the community? And so that's how that care piece shows up. And then clarity, it's just predictability. So systems, structures, like even when it comes to academics, the assessments, like how do we know exactly where kids are academically? What assessments do we give? How can we give? And that ties back into that feedback point. Like we're showing care by giving honest feedback about where people are and what's happening, whether it be learned like our students or our staff. And then the consistency. So people knowing what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, what the follow through looks so that, and it's fair. So having, again, the clarity, having those systems that we can fall back on, whether it be behavioral, academic, social, emotionally, so that sure that folks know what's expected. I think often, particularly around behavior, kids will say, that's not fair. How come they're getting this consequence and I'm not? Or how come this or how come that? First, and being able to say, actually, we have a matrix, we have these things that we follow. They're on a different path than you are, but where you are in this journey right now means that this is your consequence, regardless of who the kid is. And so that way we come under some of the bias and some of the things that come up. So it's more around what the system is rather than it is kind of person by person.
That's really interesting. And was this a framework in place when you were in the classroom?
It was not.
So when did the framework get introduced?
When I came on as the lead facilitator or principal 3 years ago. And that's when I brought this with me. I think often with small communities and often with small schools, there can be the sense of, okay, we're all just in it. We're all doing the things. And often there aren't necessarily always the tight structures that might exist at a larger scale when you're looking at a bigger district or bigger schools. Because when there's 20 schools, we need to have very clear systems so that all 20 schools are managing those pieces. Whereas when you're one small school, sometimes it doesn't exist in the same way. And so coming from San Francisco and seeing how beneficial it can be to have those structures and how reliable and how much more secure and confident people feel when they have something, they're like, oh, there's a system or there's a structure. Okay, I know what to do and how to proceed in this moment, and how that really just alleviates the stress and anxiety that folks have. Being able to bring that in, I found would potentially be helpful for this community.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense because you don't want to go too far into loosey-goosey land just because you're in a relatively close-knit community. But at the same time, like I can imagine, there's also a lot of tension between bringing too much rigidity into the system. How do you navigate that? This like tight-knit small campus feel that you want to create that allows for flexibility and maybe leans a little bit more into the care side of the things. But on the other hand, there's also this need for systems that come with clarity, that come with consistency. Yeah, it's easy for somebody to say, oh, why are you being so rigid about this? Like, why can't we do it in a way that's more unique and authentic to us? Like, how do you balance that?
I think feedback cycles are incredibly important. So asking people for their feedback and being willing to honestly take it into consideration. I think oftentimes I've been in situations where people have asked for my feedback, but then they didn't actually make any shifts or changes, or didn't actually give me information about why maybe they didn't take folks' feedback into consideration. And so I think it's important to take it in, to ask for the feedback, to talk to different stakeholders and suss out how they're navigating it and how it's working or not working for them, being able to then make changes and shifts, and being very transparent with them about why we might make a change or shift or why we might not. And so I find that we have those open lines of communication in order to support staff. And because we're so small, we have access to folks, and I think in a different sort of way than maybe if the school was a bit big.
Yeah, let's talk about feedback for a little bit. It sounds like there's an art and a science to asking for feedback and also giving feedback. And let's talk about the asking side of things, because all of us have been in those situations. Someone asks for our feedback, we decide to go for it and give it to them honestly, and then either they don't do anything about it, or they get angry, or they react negatively to it.
Yeah.
How do you ask for feedback in a way that creates a sense of psychological safety from those giving that to you? And like, what different mechanisms do you use?
Yeah. So at the end of kind of a very baseline, at the end of when we have our professional development or our staff meetings, we give feedback forms, and they're pretty standard in many ways. So something like, in what way did this objective meet or not meet? But, or in what way did we meet or not meet our objective? And then you can say, we did or you didn't. And then in what ways did this meeting or this professional development work? In what way did the structure of it work or not work for you? And then if there's anything else that you would like to tell us about anything that's coming up or anything that's going on. And so our staff will give very honest feedback. I got this from my first school in San Francisco. There's a lot of tension around, do we ask to know who is the person who gave the feedback, or do we leave it anonymous? And the thing that I learned from my very first school there was we should have people be honest and put their name and attach their email address to their feedback. Because if there is something that is working or not working for them, being able to follow up with them and say, hey, I noticed in your feedback that you said that this worked, or I noticed in your feedback that this isn't going well for you, and being able to find that time to sit down with that person and ask them about what's coming up or what's going on, or to get more information about why they wrote what they wrote. Not from a defensive place, but more from an exploration and kind of an information gathering place. And so we know from what we know from technology and social media and all the things that folks sometimes feel a lot more comfortable typing it out, and that they'll say it rather than having to actually say something to someone's face. So that's one way that we do it. And then I'll just elicit feedback we have department leads. So we have 2 for our TK through 3 team. And we have 2 for our 4th through 6th grade team, and then 1 for our 7-8 team. And so kind of the ear to the ground. And so when they're hearing things, they're supporting their team in their meetings and just informally. And so they'll say, hey, my team's really struggling with this, or hey, maybe you should think about this, and so they'll give us that feedback. And so then we can come and actually be much more proactive, like sit with folks and maybe have a circle or have like an information gathering with them if we know that a team might be struggling in particular. And then, of course, there's the normal, like in passing, like you notice, oh, someone's having a really hard day, or I've noticed they've had a rough patch for a week. Let me go ask, hey, what's coming up for you? And just sitting in the openness of the feedback. And I've done a lot of like my own personal work as a leader, where for the most part, in a place where I can sit there and take the feedback and not take it personally. And if I feel that something is coming up for me, because we all feel it in our body, like maybe your chest gets tight or your face gets hot, you can feel that feedback coming. You're like, ooh, this is actually something that has a bearing on like I'll just sit there and listen and I won't respond a lot. I might just say, okay, and ask questions. What do you mean by that? Can you tell me more? Can you give me a specific example of when that occurred for you so that I can take it back to my team or even reflect on my own or I have like my thought partner buddies, like whether it be like my supervisor or other colleagues that are also administrators at other schools, where I'll talk through, okay, so they said this. Is it me? Okay, what should I do? What might I shift? And so it's my stance because I want people to feel open to give feedback because that's how like I grow as an educator. And I think it's also how we grow as a school, because if folks are having a negative experience, then that is really true for them. And so there are potentially shifts and change that could help them to have a better experience. Or maybe this, like our school or our format or the way that we run things isn't maybe aligned to where they are as an educator at that moment or where they would like to be as a school. Environments are so different. And so being able to suss out what that is, I think is important. But I only know that if I've been in conversation and can hear what things are happening.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. That ability that you have to almost de-escalate yourself, even though there's this gut reaction to respond in a way that may not be the most edifying. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, fair enough.
I know that I struggle a lot with this, like especially early in my career, and I'm not sure that I've fully recovered from it. But I'd like to think that I've shifted a little bit towards the being able to take feedback better now. Do you feel like you were born with that ability? Was it something that you worked on, and how did you work on it?
Oh, I was definitely not born with that ability. What do I say? A recovering perfectionist, I guess, is the best way to put it. I really want to please people. I really want to do a good job, those sorts of pieces. And being in a class, starting out in a classroom, there are things that are going to go wrong, but you have a little bit more control over what's happening. And then as soon as you expand out of the classroom and you take on more of a leadership role, now it's not just the things that you do, but it's the influence you have on the folks who then do the things that they do. And you can't control for all of the pieces and all of the things. And it was a lot of reflection, a lot of thought partnership, honestly, therapy, a lot of work to really get to the place where to try to disseminate what is mine to hold and fix and what is maybe someone else's and maybe something else I can influence in another person to support them to shift or change in how they're doing. So it really has been a whole journey. And I would say in the last 3 years as a principal, that has been where I think the biggest growth has happened. I feel very fortunate because I work with people I really trust and I really care for. And because I started here as a kindergarten teacher 10 years ago, these are people who in some ways I've grown up with as an educator. And so there's a deep-seated trust. And so they'll say, hey, I don't know about that. Hey, let's talk about that. Let's work through it. And so with that and every time I would hit a new thing, overcoming that and then working through it with somebody or talking through it with someone, that's how I've been able to work through it. But definitely was not something I was born with. It still hurts if someone says, hey, you're doing a bad job or that was awful. Like it still hurts. Like, I'm just like, man, but I have to pull myself out of it and figure out how I could shift or how I can change. And in some ways, like some people give feedback. It is maybe part of my personality, or that is maybe something that, yeah, there's some dissonance there and being able to like, hold on. If what I'm doing is in service of kids and if it's in service of the growth of young people and I can see that there's growth and see that those things are happening, then I can stand on it. But if there is like dissonance with that and kids aren't growing and there's a lot of pieces that aren't happening, then there is something that I need to shift and change about how I approach.
Got it. One of the hardest things sometimes in our professional lives and even in our personal lives is exactly those close-knit, tight-knit, trusted relationships where things go awry. And sometimes it's not about you, it's the other person's having a bad day and they're actually coming at you like with a little bit of antagonism, but at the same time, there's truth in that feedback. Is there a script or some kind of self-talk that you use to de-escalate those situations? Because you just think about like in any regular family, even if it's well-meaning, sometimes it's not always well-meaning. You get the truth bombs shared with you that you then have to deal with. And I'm just curious, do you have an internal script that you follow and that helps you to de-escalate and take the high road in that interaction?
Yeah. I think what often happens, right? You get really hard feedback or someone's really upset. And then I find myself in some ways trying to like dissociate from the situation, right? Maybe it's a form of protection or whatever that is. I find myself separating from the reality of what's happening in that moment. And so the way I truly try to bring myself back is hear the pieces, and then when given space, ask a follow-up question. I'll say, oh, so you're saying this. Can you give me an example? Or validating. So what I'm hearing you say is this or this. And replying back, because I think often in those situations, people don't feel heard. And so if you can date what you hear them saying and repeat back what you hear them saying, and then say, interview if you don't have a solution in that moment, saying, can I give you a call back or can I email you with some next steps? And here's what I'm hearing you say, this, you need this, and you need this. Is that correct? Okay, so then can I email you at this time or do this in this way? I think we often as like humans feel programmed to like just respond in a moment and just to say things to like fill space, and we're responding, not actually listening. And so if we can take a step back, repeat, what I hear you saying is this, is that correct? Okay. So if you would like this, so then you need this. Is that correct? And then if you're doing that, then I think people feel heard, which I think can actually de-escalate the situation a lot more quickly.
That whole idea of what I'm hearing you say is X. Is that correct? So you're showing that you've heard them and you're also validating that their view is not wrong. Like it's just a view that they have. But also you're not necessarily agreeing because you're not saying, yeah, that's totally true. Because sometimes it's not.
Correct.
Right? And that sounds like a great technique. When we think about the opposite, when you are in a situation where you have to give feedback, what are some of the things that you consider in ensure that feedback lands well with the person that needs to receive it?
So I think I reflect a lot on my relationship with that person. So what is my pre-established relationship with that human? I try to have a pre-existing relationship with that person prior to giving feedback. I think that's obviously the idea. And there might be a time where you have someone who's new on your staff and they're 2 days in to the job and you have a very base like, hey, good morning, how's it going? Maybe you helped hire them, but that is the relationship you have with them, but you have to give them feedback. So I reflect on that. And then I know people talk about the compliment sandwich and they talk about, let's say a positive thing and let's put the constructive thing in the middle and then let's put the positive thing at the end. I know myself personally, I read through that because now I'm just waiting for you to tell me the thing that you want to tell me. I'm like, do you actually mean the compliment that you're saying? Or are you just saying that because you had to pick something because you have to tell me something that's more constructive in the middle? I like folks who are a little bit more direct. And so I try show care. That's my version of care, is like being honest. And so being clear. So I start with, for example, maybe a teacher has really good relationships with kids one-on-one, but isn't so great at kind of holding attention and holding the relationship with all the kids in the class. So I might say something like, oh, you're so good at redirecting and doing those pieces one-on-one with kids. I see you, the way that you talk to them, the way that you ask questions, you're so great at that. So I'd like to support you to expand that to the whole class so that we can do better with that, because I've noticed that when you bring it out to the whole class, there's more difficulty with you trying to control what's happening in the space. So let's take the things that you do well in the small group and let's expand that into the larger group. So that's a way of saying, hey, your classroom management is not phenomenal. And here are some things that you actually do well. So let's take something you do well and actually expand it out to the whole class. And so I find with that, it is honest. It's like honest feedback. And it's also not necessarily switching the, oh, you do that. And they're two like separate things. It's all woven together. It's playing up to people's strengths so that you can support them to improve as educators.
I like that. So having that baseline of a relationship to begin with, observing for strengths that this person has been exhibiting, and then helping them to apply those strengths in areas where they may be lacking. And it doesn't come across as a compliment sandwich, which I think if you've been working for a couple of years, you would probably see through it, or maybe even earlier. And instead, you're now being constructive in that feedback. You're helping that person. So two kind of follow-up questions on this. One, what if you can't reason for them? Because you have the disparate strengths and everything, but the area of weakness is unrelated.
Sure.
And in other times, there's maybe an urgency to giving that feedback where you might not have that space to be able to step back and construct it in this way. How do you deal with these kind of situations?
I'm pretty direct. I'll say, here's what I've observed. I've observed this and this. When maybe someone shouts at kids. I don't know. Maybe that's a vague. And so it's like, hey, I've noticed that you've raised your voice at kids multiple times. What is coming up for you that keeps happening? And again, leading with questions. So I'll ask them, like, what's happening for you? And then if they just aren't listening and this is the only way to get their attention, I was like, okay, let me support you to put in other strategies or other things in place to better support you so you don't get to the place that you're so frustrated. And then I'll say, well, are you willing? I'll come in for 15 minutes. I'll sit with you and I'll give you a couple tools and then we can touch base about how that's working or not working. So I'll use it based on observation. And there might be a case where I've heard something like a department lead might say to me like, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Then I'll just go to them directly and say, hi, it's been brought to my attention that this is happening. How can I support you to feel more successful? Because it seems like you're at a frustration point or that this isn't working. Would you like me to help you? Would you like to meet consistently? What is going to better help you to be able to move forward?
Got it. So one of the things that I'm observing about the way you're giving feedback is you're naturally addressing the issue and very factually. So here's what I observed. It's been brought to my attention. So that's number one, that you're just addressing what you're seeing. And you're not making a comment about person, that human being, their character. You're also avoiding trigger words like always or never. And at the same time, you're showing curiosity. So what's happening for you that's creating that? These are very, I would say, advanced techniques for giving feedback. How did you get to this point? Because I know it's hard. It's really hard for most people to be able to do this well. How did you get to this? And did you learn it from somewhere or some PD session or your own personal experiences?
So I think it's a few things, but I would say I sit in like how I take feedback. So I think that's first and foremost is like, what do I think would be helpful for me? Granted, I can't speak for everyone, but I know the relationship with a supervisor that I have really valued have always been ones that were full of honesty and folks that didn't pretend that I was doing something that I wasn't. Like if I was not doing a good job, I really appreciated folks that said, hey, this isn't going well. How can I support you to actually shift this or support this so that you can better serve young people? I think that is always like, how am I best in service of my community and best in service of the kids I work with? While I was in San Francisco, so I did my administrative credential at UC Berkeley in the Principal Leadership Institute, and they're amazing. I think their whole approach to learning and their approach to leadership is around you understanding who you are as a person, who you are as an educator, who you are as a learner, and then applying that to how you serve the folks around you. There's a lot of reflection of like, how do you get feedback? How do you support the people around you? How do you really truly know the people that you're working with? Because we spend a lot of hours in a school building. We spend a lot of hours with these folks. We see people's children often during the school year, more hours than they do. And so how are we working that collaboration? And you can only work in the collaboration if you can build trust and that kind of consistency. So that was one part of it. And then when I went to San Francisco Unified, they have a program. It's called TLEE, TLEE. I cannot think exactly what it stands for in this moment, but that's how you clear a credential in San Francisco Unified. You always have preliminary credentials, and so then you have to go through another steps to clear it. And so while I was administrator, I was in this program, and it was one Tuesday a month, and we sat there and we would bring our evaluations and we would bring all those pieces to the table, and they would go through it. Like, how are you going to craft the feedback to this person? How, like, where is the data that shows that this is how it's going? Like, how are you going to deliver these pieces in really honest ways? Consider the whole person and not just the fact that we are our job. It's like maybe they're having a really hard time with their family right now, and take that into consideration, support them in that way, while also still being honest about the feedback that they're giving. So that, I think I've been very fortunate to have really strong coaches and really strong guidance that have supported me to get there. And as I get to a new hurdle or new pieces, I'm like, oh, that's how you do it. Or that's what they meant when they said that, because, oh, that conversation did not go very well. So if I had approached it in this way or asked more questions, maybe it would have been better. And then when I came back to Nea a couple of years ago, we had like our JEDI meetings, our Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion meetings as an administrative team. So we're two schools. We are a Nea Community Learning Center and Alameda Community Learning Center. And we have a whole bunch of administrators across both those schools. And we sat together and talked about, like, how do we have repair conversations? How do we consider the whole person? And so that's where I really internalized the pieces around listen to people and tell them exactly what you're hearing them say so they feel heard and valued and understood, rather than always jumping in to give your point and to kind of steamroll people, which is, I think, often how leaders are taught, is like, you're the leader, you're in charge, or your opinions, your thoughts, your decisions, they matter more than the folks. And so because you were thrust into this role, that means that you were put there because people think that you're going to make the right decisions all the time. And so instead of standing outside of everyone, is like being in the mix of it and seeing how that, just really understanding what's going on and seeing the whole person in it.
One other area of curiosity I have is sometimes you hear that you want to give feedback almost immediate because that's when the issue is fresh, the learning can take place and the internalizing can take place. But on the other hand, like the other side of it that I've experienced is give feedback in the moment when it's theoretically the right time. Maybe that person's not ready in the moment to be able to receive it and actually internalize it. And sometimes there are these people in the corporate world, maybe they have these maybe once every 2 weeks, once every week, kind of one sessions with their teams. And they use those sessions to bring these things up where it's a little bit more of a sheltered, protected space. What have you found works best for you as in a school?
I think it depends, right? It's a case by case basis, right? If we think about restorative justice, we think about restorative practices, and we think about harm, right? If something happened and it was very public, then I think the restoration of what needs to happen also needs to happen in a public way. It's our accountability and our relationship with our community. So I think giving that feedback, it's not to admonish someone or to like put someone on the spot, but if something's not going well, maybe a teacher is really having a hard time and it's not going well, and you walk in, you're like, hey, it seems like you need to take a break. Why don't you take a break? And then like you have them step out, have them like calm down or whatnot while you manage the class. And when they come back in, being able to say, like, hey, I don't think that went really very well. Let's talk about it so that we can figure out how to fix the situation and be able to move forward. So I think giving the feedback on the spot or saying, hey, that didn't go very well, or I think that's misaligned to who I believe you are as an educator, or what I know to be true for you as an educator, or, that's not consistent, supporting our learners, and it's not what we value and what we say is important as a school. I'd like to find a time to talk to you about this. And so acknowledging the fact that it didn't go well and that was not the right move, but then also telling them like, hey, we're going to have a conversation about this. So they recognize, that was not the right thing, or that did not go well.
And this kind of brings us full circle because everything that you're saying couches that feedback in being clear, in being consistent about how you apply those principles of giving feedback. And it also shows care because it has to come from that place of care. And I really like how it's brought this episode full circle. And one final question I have for you is, if you were to share like maybe one thing or highlight one thing from what you've talked about today to other administrators who can improve their feedback game from tomorrow just by listening to this episode, like what would that thing be?
I think it's being honest and holding the kids at the center, whether it be positive feedback, 'cause we talked about a lot about negative and like constructive feedback, but hey, this went really well. And being able to sit in it's and I hold these kids, learn their social emotional pieces, their academic pieces, and that's something that is important, then I need to be honest and lead with questions. And I think that is probably the best way to start is like, tell me what happened. Tell me what's going on. Tell me more about why you made that decision. Then asking those questions so then you can build the trust with people, but also start to like be able to give honest feedback that are in order to like better serve young people.
I love that. So being very open, being honest, and asking and establishing that relationship from the beginning. So thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your experiences today. Really appreciate you being on the show, Charlotte. And for all of you listening, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have learned how to give and receive feedback in a way that is clear, consistent, and shows care for the people that you live with, work with, and serve. This has been CT. I've been your host for today, and I'm signing off from this episode. Thanks for listening. And that's a wrap on today's Principal Office Hours. Before you rush off to put out the next school emergency, take 2 seconds to subscribe. It's way easier than getting your budget approved. And if you like what you heard, head over to principalofficehours.com to sign up for weekly updates on the show. Also, the best compliment would be to tell your friends about us, especially the ones who look like they need therapy or a career change. We're going to be back with fresh principal insights and inspiration every week. Until then, keep being the leader that your ID badge says that you are. See you next time.